I think there. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We're going to turn on one light. I'm sorry because I can't read my notes either. It would make it very interesting. Oh, wrong one. Okay, so this is really about trying to disseminate the big bullet point items of what goes into planning an NATC conference. I can make the PowerPoint presentation available to you. Of course, there's tons more detail than this. I'm just pulling out what I felt were the biggest, most notable takeaways as we go through the process. So if you are interested in hosting NATC or any other like-minded gathering and you would like more information, you can come talk to me. All right. So to be transparent of that last conference process, we're going to disseminate as much information as possible on a very high level. And in many ways, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that NATC 2011 built off of what had come before. So it's not like we were operating in a vacuum and rebuilt the wheel. Like we had held a number of conferences before, all done very well and successfully by different coordinators in different locations. But we also wanted to implement some critical differences. So I'm going to go into what started as the exploratory committee and then became the local planning committee for NATC 11. It was a local committee comprised of about 5 members. They actually ended up being the local committee for this event as well. We get recruited a lot. But we wanted to investigate how we strove to create a model for a successful non-LA conference because it's very expensive to move the conference out of LA and very time consuming. And the balance between coordinator and local committees was problematic in the past. So we wanted to create a model that was self-sustaining, which means the conference paid for itself and needed minimal startup funds and was beneficial to both parties, the local committees and local TICO group support, as well as the overall coordinator and the JCCC as the host organization. Okay, so can we go to the first slide, please? So again, our goal was a self-sustaining model. Big things that we changed for this particular conference was the coordinator position was a full-time position. I will go over about how long they were full-time, but in the past they were contracted, and most of the past coordinators had a full-time job, and they did this coordinating on this, like in addition to that. So basically, they were very, very busy people. But we determined early on, before we decided to have the conference here, that we wanted it to be a full-time position for somewhere between 6 months to a year in advance of the conference. Also, we were going to require that the coordinator relocate or be in the area in which the conference was held. That was really critical to us so that they would know the facility and the site as it were. Okay. We also wanted to have early commitment, or we wanted to have early commitment from the host site and the local TICO network. I'm going to go over timeline in a little bit, so I'm just going to breeze through these. The workshop offerings were decided through a balance of variety, what would be appealing to our participants, size, facilities, and equipment available. So it wasn't just what felt good. I had to fit the facilities that we were going to be in. Workshop locations designed to minimize drum movements between sessions. Equipment has been a problem for us in the past, mostly not having enough available, but also the logistics of moving so many drums between sessions is a real issue for conference. So we decided to take a different approach to it. Also important was workshops and schedule were set at the launch of online registration. So when we said registration was started, you could see the entire conference schedule. You knew which workshops were offered when, and you could select from there. So there was no going back and following up with you. And it was a computer program that would determine like a balance of your first and second priorities. But of course, if you signed up first, you got all of your number ones because you were so early. So it rewarded early enrollment. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is the timeline. This is going to be about 3 slides. These are just the big bullet items again. So for us here in the Northern California Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, we started 2.5 years out thinking about, did we even want to host the NATC? Was there going to be anybody else who would step up for NATC 11, or was it going to be us? And if it was going to be us, let's be proactive about it and figure out all the details ahead of time. And that was in large part to Sue, who is running for the most part behind the scenes this weekend, but she was the one that was like, come on people, I think we gotta pull the trigger. All right, So 2.5 years out, local exploratory committee pulled together and said, okay, I think we gotta investigate whether we can actually do this. So about 2.25 years out, we submitted our proposal to the JACCC saying, we're willing to host the NATC 11, this is how we wanna do it. So we submitted a timeline, a budget, and all of the things I'm about to cover with you so that they could evaluate our proposal. They accepted, so 2 years out from the NATC 11, we were able to announce both site and date, which was big for the participants at the then current NATC 2009 conference. They already knew what the schedule was for 2 years and they could plan accordingly. 1 year out, we in the local committee confirmed working committees. So these are volunteer members from the local TICO network. We said we have a number of jobs that will be bigger or beyond the capacity of the coordinator and the paid staff. So we need some people from our local committee, local community to step up and take these roles. And we got that firm commitment at 1 year out when we gathered again to confirm that everybody was still on board with doing NATC 11 here. And then we also used that time to do the D-School activity that you're about to do. We did the same activity then within our local NorCal TICO network to come up with things we might want to do for the conference, new activities. We also put out, so we announced, interviewed, and then selected our coordinator around 1 year in advance. And the final budget was approved by the JACCC. Next slide. All right, 10 months out. So now we passed the year mark. So we're in the fall of 2010 at this point. The coordinator, we made it a requirement. Yuta, as you know, was the coordinator. At that time, he was living in Japan. We made it a requirement that he come back to America for at least 2 weeks in December to meet with our committee chairs, because the local committee had been doing a lot of the work, but we felt it was important for him to get in there, meet the people he'd be working with, figure out the process in which they would be making decisions and moving forward and communicating with each other. So he came in December to do that, to make that contact, and also visit the site and confirm what the local committee had already sort of proposed to him as how we wanted things to go. In that time, we were also collecting. We did an online workshop proposal system, so anybody interested in leading a workshop could submit it online, had the basic information. That information was then sent to a workshop vetting committee, which was a subset of the advisory board. So it's 3 people not in any of the parties that I mentioned. They evaluated the workshops for quality, experience of the instructor, and also like the interest level, like how interesting do they feel this would be for the larger TICO community. After that vetting process, it was then put against our facility and our equipment capacity. Like there's no sense we offer you workshops that we can't actually give you equipment for, so we had to do a balance of that. Let's see. We also were ironing out our housing options here on campus. Depending on the location of where an NATC actually occurs, sometimes housing is a requirement of your agreement, sometimes it's not, so different levels of work are involved with that. 8 months out, the coordinator begins half-time remotely. So he was still in Japan, I believe, at that time, but he had a long list of to-dos, which included updating and designing the website registration process, or just the website itself, and then collecting more detailed workshop information from the selected workshops. At 6 months out, coordinator began full-time on-site. So Yuta moved from Japan to the Bay Area to be here all the time. He was working out of the San Jose TICO office. Assistant coordinator also began, I believe, around this time, but half-time and remotely. So the assistant coordinator wasn't here, but the tasks that they decided between the two of them was, assistant coordinator was largely in charge of website, which could be done not on site. So they started at the same time, but had very different types of tasks. And also 6 months out, which would be February 2011, we launched the website for early registration with workshops and schedule and concert information already. So I can't stress how important that part was, because that resolved all of our cash flow issues by launching early with that amount of information. If you just launch registration, you might get a trickle of people interested and having faith that there will be a nice range of workshops available. But because we had that information up front, I mean, we were, I don't know, we did about 80% of enrollment, I think, within like a month and a half. Like it was like done, and we're like, oh wow, we're actually kind of full. We actually we're like trying to figure out scenarios in which we would have to turn people away, or can we modify their participation in order to still have them come. But yeah, launching the website or the registration process with all of that information is very, very critical. Next slide, please. So 4 months out, assistant coordinator moved. I think Chris moved to the area around this time and began full time. We enhanced the website registration with more information so we could fill out the plenary session content, discussion session content, all of that stuff. So the other aspects of the conference schedule was then being fleshed out and posted online. We also then collected marketplace registrations and volunteer signups. 2 months out, the interns began full-time, so they were also staffed or housed in the San Jose Tyco office. And they just really provided a lot of logistical and administrative support to both coordinators at that time. 1 week out is the collection and tagging of equipment that we were getting from the local community. And this was another new thing that Utah instigated, which was a logistical run-through with all committee heads. So I think we did this virtually. We did it in person as much as we could, and some people called in. So basically we had all the different working committee heads, so like welcome reception, we had equipment, we had our volunteers people, like all of us were in one room with Utah Chris and his staff, and we said, okay, 9 a.m. on Friday afternoon, what is happening? And we had a blow-by-blow of each of our roles, how they conflicted. We worked out a lot of things that could have been issues later, like who had the golf cart that I needed, and like and even more critical, like I need that group of volunteers, they also need to be here, so wait, we don't have enough volunteers right now, what are we gonna do? So that was a really critical thing that happened for us. And then, of course, STI, or Summer Tyco Institute, was also occurring that week. And then this the final point, of course, there's the weekend of NATC, which I did not include, but I figured you guys could do the math. And then 1 to 2 months later, this is the hope. That didn't exactly happen. It took us a little longer to resolve it, but you would hope it takes about 2 months to close everything out, to collect all revenue that's due to you, and then, of course, pay all your bills, and then submit the final report to both the advisory board and the JACCC. So that's the general, very, very basic timeline. I'm going to take some questions. Does anybody have questions now about timeline? Okay. I don't give a lot of time for you to raise your hand. So here we go. Staffing. Staffing. Just so you again, oh, sorry, I'm missing that one. Okay, so budget. We'll go over budget. So you don't need to know all these numbers. I put them up there so you get an idea. The big one is Tyco conference costs, to do it on the scale and the magnitude that we did at NATC 11, it costs a little over $200,000. You will bring in that much money and you will put out that much money. I broke it out just in case you're wondering how much of that was, participant registration versus concert tickets. Obviously, NATC registration is the big revenue stream there. We were fortunate to get some small grants, but we actually didn't pursue them once we did early registration because we had so much cash coming in, we didn't have to fundraise anymore. And with the future of NATC's relationship with JACCC so ambiguous, we didn't want to fundraise a whole bunch of money and then not know if it was going to be able to come back to us later. So we decided, let's just make it run in black. We can always implement our fundraising plan later. So that's why grants is a little small. Donations are like, oh, I'm not going to remember the name of it. It's the, Tyco, what? Drum Circle, thank you. Drummer Circle, as well as other random donations from people. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. This is the expenses, 202. So if you do the math, there was about $7,000 profit. But I will note, for the first time, NATC paid overhead to both JACCC and San Jose Tyco. Overhead, I think most of you are leaders of your group, so you know what that, like, it's basically covering like the paper they used while they were in our office using our copy machines. Like if they basically borrowed office supplies and used our time and our capacity, so we were paid for that. Each organization received a little over $11,000 for that time that we gave to NATC. Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry.
Can you go back, or what is the profit from Tyco Jam? I forgot the revenue side.
I would need to look. 16?
Okay.
Oh, sorry. So I want to specify though, because I had to do this sort of big picture. I believe that 16,000, if you go to the previous revenue, that 16,000 is Taiko Jam only, like people who bought only concert tickets. Because if you remember, those of you who came to NATC 11, concert tickets was a part of your registration last time. Because of the way the facilities worked out, we got free use of the hall if it was part of our conference programming. So it had to be mandatory, like you got an automatic ticket with your registration. So there is a little bit of overlap between the NATC registration with the Taiko Jam tickets. And that's revenue, and then there's, if you go to the next slide, so 16,000. Then Taiko Jam concert cost us 21,000. So I know that Taiko Jam itself ran in the black. Like if we took it out and put it as its own little budget, it ran in the black itself. But because of the way we contracted to produce and organize Taiko Jam and the conference, we had to put it all in one lump sum budget. That was a great question. Any other questions about budget? All right, moving forward. So,
Going back, can you just teach out general conference expenses a little bit, like give us an idea of what is included?
Equivalent of that is like how much it costs to make the workshop packets. Part of that is also, I believe, the housing for the work. No, that was under workshop. So let me think. General workshop. I'm thinking, it's very legitimate expenses. I know it's definitely workshop. It was about 8 items. I know workshop packets were part of it. I think it's included rental of facilities. So the workshop facility, that's a big part of that. So it's all things that couldn't be separated into welcome reception, STI, Taiko Jam, Taiko 10, workshops. Workshops is where we put the housing and the meals for the workshop leaders and the payment for them for their fees of that. So that's why that's separated out. Payment processing fees, that's because we did everything online. We had to pay somebody to let us use their system. Yeah, that was sucky, but had to happen. Necessary evil. All right. All right, so I already kind of touched on this, but for the first time in NATC history, we were able to offer all workshop leaders housing and meals. We would have loved to also offer travel, but that was not, at this time, financially feasible. And as I mentioned before, we had a fundraising plan for contributed income, but once early enrollment started, that was no longer needed, so we disregarded that. Okay, staffing. I have a lot more information I can give you on this, but these are the people it took to put on. I'm sure there's people I missed as well, but these are the people that were in some way, shape, or form associated with putting on NATC 11. So of course, there's the in-place JACCC Advisory Board. And I listed hours per month when I thought it was appropriate, just so you can kind of get a scope of the amount of work and time it takes. There's also a JACCC staff liaison. So they dedicated one person, I think less than quarter time, to work with Utah so that bookkeeping and basically our NATC history, because all of the records and past materials are housed at JACC, or at least were housed at JACC. Then here locally, we had the exploratory, which became the local planning committee. There was like 5 or 6 of us, and we spent about 6 to 8 hours per month, at least that for 2.5 years prior. Then it moves to the coordinator. This is a paid position. He was half-time for 2 months remotely, and then full-time for 6 months on site. The assistant coordinator, half-time, another paid position, half-time for 2 months, full-time for 4 months, and then we had at the very bottom the interns, which were full-time for 2 months prior. Next slide. Okay. In addition to that, we had a Taiko Jam producer, so we treated Taiko Jam independent, well, in our minds, independent of the Taiko conference. It needed its own administration and logistics. So that person was quarter-time for about 4 months, is my best estimation, and half-time for 2 months, and then full-time for 2 months. Or actually, I would say full-time for 2 weeks. That should be weeks, not for months. Then there were 6 working committee chairs, and I'm going to go over what responsibilities they handled. So the volunteer working committee chairs were for workshops, which meant they were the liaison between the coordinator, the site, and the workshop leader. Because what we wanted to do was communicate early and timely with the workshop leaders what size of room they would have, how many participants they had in their workshops, what kind of drums or equipment would be in those rooms. Because we are all flexible people. All of you who have led workshops, we know how to adapt if we don't have what we asked for, but it's always nice to know if we don't have what we asked for before we walk into the room. Or if we're gonna have more people than we thought we would, I wanna know that before as well. So we felt we made it a point to have that. So we had to separate workshops from just general conference administration and really make it a point to have somebody be a liaison to those people. So there was workshops or instructor hospitality. There was equipment, which was, I'm going to say a very big deal because of course that was my committee. There was registration, which was also very, very huge. Sue was in charge of that one. I mean, we had over 700, if you include the volunteers, we had over 800 people come through TICO conference that weekend, and they all needed name tags of some sort. They needed to know what their schedules were, whether they were a volunteer or whether they were a full participant, and that was total database management, and that took a lot of time. We also had a volunteer committee, which was headed by Elise and Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono. This is how tired I am. Yoko Okano, now in Seattle. That would be amazing if it was Yoko Ono. They did some new stuff as well. They broke up their volunteers based on how much time they're committing over the weekend. They broke them up into teams, and then that way they just assigned teams to various locations. And like for me in equipment, it was very useful to have the same team of people every time, so I didn't have to explain day after day or hour after hour, this is what your job is, this is how you treat the drums. That was a really, really good change, I felt. And the last committee, which was also really important, was welcome reception, which was headed by Mountain View Buddhist Temple. They just took it and ran with it, and we didn't have to think about it after that. I mean, because that is, even though it's short and it's in the very beginning, it is a huge undertaking to feed almost 800 people and keep them entertained, and also get them to the space and back in a timely fashion. Okay. Also, there were underneath or working with the committee chairs, there were about 24 volunteer committee members from the local TICO community network. So they had signed up early on, and they helped design and figure out the processes for each of those committees. And then, of course, under those people were about a little over 70 volunteers that worked for the conference throughout the weekend. So I didn't do the math, but that's obviously a lot of people that it takes. Thought that was helpful to know. So I'm just going to sum up real quick with general takeaways that if I had to do I'm not saying I will, but if I had to do the conference over again, these are the things that I would. Again, I did not say I would. That is not a proposal submission. These are the things I would strongly, strongly recommend, and Yuta can probably add to this as well, but the coordinator should be full-time and working on or near the site at least 6 months in advance. I think that is imperative. Also, complete conference schedule, including workshop offerings, should be finalized prior to opening of registration. Those two, and then next. This one's big. I did one of those, I cheated and did bullet points underneath one. Clear, concise, timely communication is key. So coordinator worked closely with both the workshops and equipment committees to designate rooms with set equipment. The workshop committee communicated early and often with selected workshop leaders about participant numbers, room size, equipment, and determining additional needs and requirements. The equipment committee had preliminary count for each TICO and stand brought or being planned to be brought, and a clear tagging system for matching the stands with the drums. And in addition to that, so we had a pretty good estimate of what was coming in so that we could do our workshop decisions. And then when they came in, we inventoried again. And then we inventoried again when they went back out, just to make sure everybody got all of their stuff back. And then the last one is a note for future is we need more transparency and communication between the committees, especially regarding registration and database management, because what happened, we each had our little workforces, and we may or may not have had volunteers, but that didn't all go through Sue's registration database, so all of a sudden we had people showing up who needed name tags that she had no idea about, or there were people who were listed twice, like maybe as a participant, like a part-time participant, and also as a volunteer, and they, like, which name tag do they wear? Do they get 2 name tags? Like, she had to work all of that out on the spot, so we said if we could have easily done that beforehand with just a little bit more communication. I believe, is there a next slide? Oh, yes, Sue wanted me to point out. This model that I just shared with you was basically used on a much smaller scale to do this launch meeting for you today. We already had it, so we're like, why not just use it? Let's condense the timeline, and obviously we have a smaller staff, but it can be used for much more smaller gatherings, even just one-off workshops. If, of course, the timeline won't be 2.5 years out if you're doing a one-time workshop, but it can be modified. I think there's just things to keep in mind as you move forward. So I had to talk really fast to make up some time, but I did want to allow for questions. I think I have time for any general questions, and I will try to do my best to answer. Yuta is also in the room. We also have a lot of the local planning committee here and the workshop, and not workshop, the working committee and the volunteers from Northern California in the room, so they can also help as well. Yes? Oh, I need to talk to you about that. So what happened is okay, the question, sorry, thank you. The question was, how do we handle the communication between all of these staff people in the local Taiko community network? So what happened was, before we submitted our proposal to JACCC, we gathered the local Taiko community together. And we said, we're considering submitting this proposal. This is what we're thinking in terms of scope. This is what we're thinking in terms of timeline. Are you guys on board? Can we have a general commitment of support? You don't have to write down numbers of drums yet. You don't have to write down numbers of people, but we have to know you're willing in some way, shape, or form commit. And we had over 30 groups respond to that, either by coming to the meeting itself or responding by email. Then I believe at the year out mark, we brought them back together, and then we said, these are the working committees that we're going to have you guys sign up for. And then we also had them sign a sheet that said they were willing to commit drums and manpower for it. After that, it became working committee head responsibility or conference coordinator, depending on where people signed up for, to reach out to the people who had signed up. I will say most of that happened via email. So that's maybe another thing that I would have written as a correction. Even though we had collected contact information of both email and phone number, most of us were communicating via email, and if people did not respond to us, we figured they were no longer interested. We did not follow up with phone calls at the early stage, and that way I think there were a couple of people who had volunteered early that were never reached again because they either never got our email or they decided not to respond. Does that answer your question? Ron?
How many drums did it take to put it on?
354.
Wow.
Somewhere around there. I think give or take a couple. I can show you my database. It was really, really crazy. I mean, Yuta did, so we sent out a preliminary survey with pictures of each type of drum, talking about diameters and then type of stands, like this is what I define as a naname, and then we got a collection of what people had and what they were willing to share with us. And then I went back, knowing we had made some decisions about certain types of workshops, I went back and asked particular groups that I knew had a couple more of X, Y, Z. I did it to fill it out. Actually, I will correct that statement. I collected around 354 drums, but I will say for the most part, the chudaiko size, we had in excess of about 50 drums sitting in this room the entire conference that never had to go out. The harder part about taiko conference is not actually chudaiko and beta stands or tateuchi stands. It's more, you might run out of slant stands, and you'll definitely run out of what I call specialty equipment, so odaiko stands. Okero, especially for katsugi okero, shime. Those are the things you'll be short on because most groups have a lot of J's, we call them J's, a lot of chudaiko and maybe one or two shime. So like to get 25 shime in one room, you have to solicit a lot of people. But I think it can be done with less, but again, that's knowing early on, this is what I probably will have, and then limiting and structuring your workshops around that. Because facility-wise, we had done the tour of Stanford, and we're like, we only can offer 14 workshops at a time. There's only possibly 4 spaces that can have 25 plus. Then there's like 6 rooms that could hold between 10 and 20 people. And then there's about 5, like we did the math to figure out this is an ideal space for this size workshop or this type of workshop. Any other questions? Margaret. That is correct. Yuta and Chris were working very, what? Oh, repeat the question. Sorry, they want me to repeat the question. So, oh shoot. Now you've interfered, now I can't remember. The question was, workshop registration was capped, and that was handled online, like so nobody could sign up for a workshop that was already filled. and nobody could sign up for the conference and not actually get, yes, that is correct. That is correct. So it was all programmed that this is the max. I mean, we did have some wiggle room. So once we approached that max, we started discussing, like, you know, so the instructor had said, I only want 16 people in this workshop. The room could probably hold 4 more. Let's go back to the workshop leader and talk to them and see if that's possible. So we did a little bit of stuff like that. So the hard number moved a little bit. And overall, workshop leaders are very accommodating. But in essence, yes.
It's a two-part question. One is,
Ask me one at a time. He has to come here. And you have to also talk to this mic.
did you, there's a two-part question. One is, did you guys hit that hard cap, and was there sort of interest that couldn't be served? And then two, theoretically, in order to serve that interest in future conferences, what additional resources would be necessary to make that happen?
Nice question. I think Yuta's going to have to help me answer that. So I believe we hit the cap.
And then when we expanded, we hit that cap too. And the people that wanted to still come had to become observers, and we had cap for observers.
Okay, that's the first part, so hold on to that. So again, I have to repeat what he just said. So we hit the first cap. We also hit the expanded cap when we had gone back to workshop leaders and asked them to take a couple more people. And then after that, we asked them to sign up. Like, we would only offer them observer status and observer registration. Then the second part of that is, how many people do you think that was, estimation, and what would be required in order to service those people? How many people do you think, like, were turned away from registration, full registration, and becomes observer?
I don't know, because once we hit that, we put that there was no more registration, right? So that.
So we're missing information.
It wasn't like inquiry, and we just said no. We said, how long before the conference did you hit max?
Ooh.
Oh, I see. First cap was met, I think, a month and a half after.
So first cap, the initial,
After registration.
yeah. So March, by mid-March or end of March for sure, we had launched registration early February. By mid to late March, we had reached our capacity, our initial capacity. And then we went back, communicated, got a little bit of an expansion, and that was filled by.
And that took a while.
That took a little while.
Yeah. After we expanded to fill up, I actually don't know.
Maybe until May, June or so, and I think it was probably still trickling in. Did we have a waiting list for? I don't think it was automated. We had people just contact the general TCA conference, which ended up falling in Yuta's lap. like ended up going through the regular staff. I mean, that could be something, but I think, yeah, that could be something for future.
Did it take long to fill the overflow because the word was already out there in school?
Maybe, potentially, but,
So we had an option for people to be on the waiting list.
oh, okay.
So when we decided to expand,
Yuta, why don't you come up here? It's too hard for me to repeat. So I'm going to amend and correct my previous question, my previous answer. Apparently, there was an online waiting list.
No, sorry.
okay.
Like, there was a sign up for a waiting list just in case. So we had that, and once we decided to expand, we contacted those people first to register, and then we opened it back again.
But so, if I'm hearing that correctly, in addition, or in answer to Tony's question, the waiting list that you had collected was not quite enough to fill the expanded capacity. And then it took us a little bit longer to fill that, since most people had heard that the conference was already closed for registration. Okay, Roy is telling me I am out of time. And I am, because I know you guys are totally hungry. So I hope that gives you a little bit more insight into what goes into NATC. That's not to say this is the only way to do it, of course. It's just what worked for this area. Again, I have much more detailed information. Almost any of the local planning committee has much more information if you want it, which is the full timeline, the full working committees and the responsibilities, all of that stuff we can make accessible to you, and probably eventually be in some way, shape, or form accessible through the TCA website, so that we can help other people plan a conference of this scope. Did you have a question, or you just? That is, okay, I'm going to sign off here for our live streaming. Thank you for joining us. Sorry for the unclear communication at times.